Mylin stood at the frosted pane of her small cabin window, staring out at a world erased by white. The Wyoming winter had descended with a fury that felt personal, swallowing the landscape just as grief had swallowed her life. It had been 8 months since the fever took Wei, her husband, leaving her alone in a land that barely tolerated their existence, let alone supported a widow with 4 young children. 6 months of drought had preceded the snow, killing the vegetable garden Wei had tended so carefully. Now, the snow finished what the sun had started. Mylin turned from the window, pulling her thin shawl tighter against the pervasive chill. The cabin was silent, save for the wind howling through the chinks in the logs. On the table, 4 tin plates sat in a row. Jun's, Dao's, Un's, and little Lian's. She had laid them out the night before, a desperate ritual to maintain order while their world collapsed. Beside Lian's plate rested a small wooden doll Wei had carved 2 winters ago. Mylin pressed her palms against the rough wood of the table, her head bowing. She had failed. She had failed to keep the crops alive, failed to keep the pantry full, failed to be both mother and father in a territory that saw her only as a foreigner. The stockings hung from the mantel, limp and flat. The children had hung them with trembling hands, their faces too thin, their eyes too big. She had promised nothing, yet they hoped anyway. Above her, the loft floorboards creaked. Small feet padded across the wood. "Mama." Lian's voice drifted down, soft and laced with sleep. "Is it Christmas?" Mylin's throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. She gripped the table edge, her knuckles turning white. "Yes, little one," she called back, her voice trembling. "It is Christmas." But there was no food. The rice sack was empty. The dried fish was gone. There was only hot water and the last of the tea leaves. "Merry Christmas, Lian," came Jun's voice, older and trying to sound brave for his sister. "Let Mama have a moment." But Mylin wasn't needing a moment, she was needing a miracle. She stared at the empty plates, wondering how she would explain to them that Santa Claus did not visit cabins where the fire had burned down to embers. Outside, the wind moaned, a mournful sound that chilled her bones. She should build up the fire, but the woodpile was terrifyingly low. She heard them whispering above, wondering if there was anything in the stockings. She heard Jun's gentle, lying reassurance. Mylin closed her eyes and tried to remember the prayers of her ancestors, or even the prayers of the god the locals worshipped, but only silence answered. Then, the muffled crunch of hooves on snow cut through the morning quiet. Mylin's head snapped up. No one came out here. Not since Wei died. Not since the townspeople stopped buying her laundry services, whispering behind their hands about the foreign woman on the hill. She moved to the window, wiping away the condensation. A wagon was approaching up the drifted path, pulled by a massive draft horse, its breath pluming in the freezing air. A single figure sat on the bench, huddled inside a heavy buffalo coat. Arthur Hayes. Mylin blinked, unsure if the hunger was making her hallucinate. Arthur was a rancher who lived 5 miles east. He was a mountain of a man, known for his silence and his solitude. The townspeople called him a hermit, a man who preferred the company of his cattle to people. He had exchanged perhaps 20 words with Wei in all the years they had been neighbors. What was he doing here in a blizzard on Christmas morning? The wagon halted before her cabin. Arthur climbed down, his movement stiff from the cold. He didn't knock. He simply looked at her door, his presence commanding even through the timber. "Morning," his deep voice rumbled, muffled by the wind. "Open up. I need a hand." Mylin opened the door slowly, stepping out onto the porch, the icy wind biting her face. "Mr. Hayes? I do not understand." Arthur was already at the wagon bed, pulling back a canvas top heavy with snow. "Don't need you to understand. Just need you to help me carry this in before it freezes solid." Mylin moved closer, confused and wary. Then she saw what lay beneath the canvas. A smoked side of beef, sacks of potatoes, a bag of white flour, dried apples, a jar of molasses, salt, and a large sack of rice. Tucked in the corner was a small paper bag of hard red candies. Her vision blurred. The world swayed. I cannot pay for this," she whispered, her accent thick with fear. "We have no money, Mr. Hayes. I have nothing to give you." Arthur lifted a heavy sack of potatoes onto his shoulder. He looked at her, his eyes blue and sharp under the brim of his hat. "Did I ask for payment?" "But I had a good year," he said gruffly. "Too much stock. Would have gone to rot. Your pride is your business, Mrs. Chen, but letting good food freeze while children go hungry? That's just foolishness." The cabin door creaked open behind her. All four children stood in the doorway. Jun held Lian's hand. Dao and pressed forward, eyes wide. They stared at the wagon as if it were a dragon from the old stories come to life. "Is that food?" Lian asked, her voice small. Mylin looked at Arthur, this giant stranger who had driven through a blizzard to save them. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. Arthur met her gaze. There was no pity in his face, only a steady, clear-eyed respect. "Accept it or don't. But decide fast. It's cold." "Help him," Mylin said, the command rushing out of her. "Jun, Dao, help Mr. Hayes." The boys moved instantly, rushing into the snow in their thin boots. Arthur directed them with quiet authority, treating them not like nuisances, but like capable hands. He handed Lian the bag of candies, and the look on her face was like the sun breaking through the storm clouds. Arthur didn't just drop the supplies, he came inside. He filled the cabin with his sighs and a quiet, steady warmth. He saw the low fire and immediately went back out, returning with armfuls of his own seasoned oak logs from the wagon. He built the fire until it roared, pushing back the frost that had claimed the room. "Water," he said to June Big Pot. Mylin watched him, feeling like a guest in her own home. He moved with an efficiency that betrayed a life of self-reliance. He unwrapped the beef, slicing off thick steaks. I can cook," Mylin stammered, stepping forward. "Please, sit." Arthur glanced at her. "I'm sure you can." "But I'm already standing," he paused, then softened. "We'll do it together." And they did. For the first time in 8 months, the kitchen was alive. Mylin washed the rice, a luxury she hadn't seen in a year, while Arthur showed Dao how to peel potatoes without taking half the vegetable with the skin. The smell of searing meat and boiling rice filled the air, a scent so rich it made Mylin dizzy. "Coffee's ready," Arthur said, pouring a cup from the pot he'd placed on the grate. He handed it to her. "Drink. You look like you're about to fall over." Mylin took the cup. It was real coffee, strong and black. The first sip brought tears she could no longer suppress. She sat at the table, and Lian climbed into her lap, clutching a piece of candy. "Are we having a feast, Mama?" "Yes, precious," Mylin sobbed, kissing her daughter's head. "We are having a feast." The meal was a blur of joy. The children ate with a ferocity that broke Mylin's heart, exposing just how hungry they had truly been. Arthur sat at the head of the table, eating quietly, watching them. He didn't speak much, but he listened. He listened to Dao talk about the rabbit he almost caught. He listened to and explain her mending. He treated them with a solemn dignity that made them sit straighter. After the meal, the cabin was warm and full of a comfortable heaviness. "Will you stay?" Jun asked suddenly. "The snow is getting worse." Mylin looked at the window. It was true, the blizzard had turned into a whiteout. "It is not safe to travel," she said, looking at Arthur. "Please stay." Arthur hesitated, then nodded. "I'll sleep in the barn with the horse. I've got furs." "No," Mylin said firmly. "You have saved our lives. You will sleep by the fire." That night, Arthur sat in Wei's old rocking chair while the children gathered around him. He didn't know the fairy tales they knew, so he told them stories of the high country. He spoke of wolves that hunted in packs, of wild mustangs that could never be tamed, and of the silence of the mountains that felt like church. Lian fell asleep against his heavy boot. Arthur's large, calloused hand rested gently on her head, a gesture so tender it made Mai Lin's breath hitch. The next morning, the storm had broken, but the drifts were high. Arthur stayed. He repaired the hinge on the door, fixed the leak in the roof, and helped Jun chop enough wood to last a month. He didn't take over, he worked alongside them, teaching the boys how to hold the axe, how to read the grain of the wood. By Sunday, the path to town was clear. "We go to church," Mai Lin said, coming out of the bedroom in her best silk tunic, worn but clean. "To give thanks." She looked at Arthur. "Will you come?" Arthur looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight. "Town folks. They talk, Mai Lin. Me bringing you food is one thing. Walking into church together is another." "Let them talk," Mai Lin said, lifting her chin. Her eyes flashed with a fire that had been dormant for too long. "I am done hiding. You are my friend. If they cannot accept that, it is their sin, not ours." Arthur studied her face, then slowly smiled. It changed his whole demeanor, making him look years younger. "All right then." The walk to the settlement was long, the snow crunching under their boots. When they entered the small wooden church, the silence that fell was absolute. Mrs. Gable gasped audibly. Reverend Cole paused mid-sentence. The sight of the reclusive rancher standing beside the Chinese widow and her 4 children was a scandal made flesh. They walked down the center aisle. People turned their backs. Whispers hissed like snakes. "Heathens," someone muttered. "Unnatural," said another. Mai Lin held her head high, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Arthur walked beside her, his face like granite, daring anyone to speak up. They sat in an empty pew near the front. During the sermon, which ironically focused on her charity to the stranger, Mai Lin felt the weight of 100 judgment-filled eyes. But she also felt Arthur's solid presence beside her, and the warmth of her children who were full-bellied and safe. After the service, the shunning was immediate. As they exited, a group of older boys pushed past June. "Look at the laundry boy," one sneered. "And his new daddy." Jun stumbled, his face flushing. The bully, a boy twice his size named Tom, shoved him again. "Does he pay your mama in beef?" Before Mai Lin could move, Arthur was there. He didn't shout. He simply reached out and caught Tom's shoulder in a grip that looked like iron. "You'll apologize," Arthur said. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder. "To the boy. And to his mother." Tom tried to pull away, but he was pinned. "My pa says." "I don't care what your pa says," Arthur interrupted. "I'm telling you what is right. Apologize." Tom stammered a terrified apology. Arthur released him, and the boy scrambled away. The townspeople stared, shocked. Arthur Hayes had never gotten involved in town disputes. He turned to June. "You all right, son?" Jun nodded, looking at Arthur with hero worship in his eyes. "Yes, sir." The ride back to the cabin was quiet. The incident had cast a shadow over the day. When they arrived, Arthur began to hitch up his wagon. "What are you doing?" Mai Lin asked, stepping out onto the porch. "Leaving," Arthur said, not looking at her. "I made it worse. Staying here. It puts a target on you. They'll make your life hell because of me." "My life was already hell," Mai Lin cried out, stepping off the porch into the snow. "They ignored us while we starved. Do you think their silence was kindness?" Arthur stopped, his hands resting on the harness. "I'm a solitary man, Mai Lin. I don't fit in that world. I can't protect you from their tongues." "I do not need protection from words," she said, walking up to him. We need," she faltered. "What?" Arthur asked softly. "We need a partner," she whispered. "The children. They haven't smiled in months until you came. And I had forgotten what it was like to not be alone." Arthur turned to her. "I'm old, Mai Lin. I'm set in my ways. I've got nothing but a ranch and a bad reputation. You have a heart, she said, reaching out to take his rough hand. You sold something, didn't you? To buy the food. You did not just have the extra. Arthur looked away. My pocket watch. My father's gold watch. Mylin gasped. Arthur. Why? He looked back at her, his eyes raw. Because I was tired of watching you struggle from a distance. Because I saw you at the window every day, trying to keep your dignity while the world crushed you. And because I was lonely. God, I was so lonely. Mylin squeezed his hand. Then do not be lonely anymore. Marry me, Arthur said. The words hung in the cold air, sudden and absolute. Mylin froze. What? Marry me, he repeated, his voice gaining strength. I can't offer you a refined life. But I can offer you a warm house, food on the table, and a man who will stand between you and anyone who tries to hurt you. I can be a father to those kids, if they'll have me. The town will never accept it, Mylin said, tears freezing on her cheeks. Then we'll make our own town, Arthur said. Out at the ranch. You, me, the kids. That's enough. Mylin looked at this man, this rugged, gentle, lonely man. She thought of Wei, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that he would want them to live. He would want them to be loved. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Arthur. He pulled her into his arms, the buffalo coat rough against her cheek, smelling of wood smoke and snow. For the first time in a long time, the cold didn't matter. The door to the cabin burst open. The 4 children tumbled out, cheering. They had been listening. He's staying. Dao shouted. Leanne ran and wrapped her arms around Arthur's leg. Papa Arthur, she squealed. Arthur looked down at them, his eyes wet. He looked at Mylin, and a slow, genuine smile broke across his face. Yeah, he choked out. I'm staying. Reverend Cole married them 2 weeks later in the parlor of the ranch house. No one from town came, except for the blacksmith who had always been kind to June. It didn't matter. The house was warm, the pantry was full, and the laughter of 4 children filled the high ceilings of the ranch house. Spring eventually came to Wyoming. The snow melted, revealing the dark, rich earth. Arthur and Mylin stood side by side on the porch, watching Jun and Dao help herd the cattle, while Ann and Leanne fed the chickens. Mylin leaned her head against Arthur's shoulder. They were outcasts to the town, perhaps. But here, on this land, they were kings and queens of their own kingdom. Regrets? Arthur asked quietly, his arm tightening around her waist. Mylin looked at the greening hills, then up at her husband's face. Not one. They had survived the winter. They had survived the hunger. And in the process, they had found something far more nourishing than food. They had found each other. The story of Mylin and Arthur teaches us that true family is defined not by blood or origin, but by the courage to show up when it matters most. It reminds us that love often requires a leap of faith, breaking down the barriers of prejudice and pride to find connection in the bleakest of winters. Arthur's strength lay not in his ability to endure isolation, but in his vulnerability to admit he needed others, while Mylin showed that asking for help is not a weakness, but a bridge to survival. Their union proves that even when the world turns its back, we can build our own sanctuary through kindness and shared resilience. In the end, it was their willingness to choose each other over the expectations of society that turned a season of starvation into a lifetime of abundance. What did you think of Arthur's decision to sell his father's watch for a neighbor he barely knew? Do you think you would have been as brave as Mylin to walk into that church? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of hope and redemption in the Wild West, please like and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.